So good thing it's a 6-part series. So the plan is going to be like this. Why we read Ruth on Shavuos. We'll be safe for Shavuos night to give you what to look forward to. If you've missed the night of the Omer, no, I'm just kidding. But that's going to be that. Today's going to be primarily background. I think the background is vital to appreciate the themes that emerge from the Megillah. So we're going to do background. That's why the source sheets, Baruch Hashem, are not as vital if you don't have them. So anything we're going to start out, let's have a goal. What's going to be the goal? Hopefully, if it's not too boring tonight, you might come back next week or at least in 2 weeks. So the goal is going to be, as I always like to do, so I believe everything that is written, that is divine, is speaking directly to me and to you and to you and to you. It was not meant to be left in the heavens, and the proof was that it was not left in the heavens. So that's a proof which has no way to go against that. So it is speaking every single word in Tanakh, every single word in Chumash, every S, every Aleph, every part of the Aleph, every crown on a letter is meant to speak directly to us. Rabbi Akiva used to darshan, he used to expound on every S, every little crown. Okay, we're not able to do that nowadays, but we are able to get a lot from all the explicit, beautiful Torah that is given to us in the written Torah and in the oral Torah. So one is, the general goal is to pull out life lessons and try to apply them in 2024. Someone one time told me about technology. He made a comment that technology, it's just the last 15 years, it's gone so fast. And, all this new technology that we never had before. So he had a great line. He said, when Hashem gave the Torah, he also knew about technology in this generation. So when Hashem gave Tanakh, he also knew about all the challenges and all the anti-Semitism and all the darkness and all the light and all the ups and downs we Jews go through. He knew about all that. And he still gave it all to us. So we're going to learn from it. Adam, you didn't miss much. Don't worry. We have a chair for you. So the second thing is, which is going to happen a little more next week and the coming weeks, is just to gain an appreciation from the words. The way the words are, they're glaring. There's messages in the different words, the different sentences, the structure. That would be the second goal. And the third would hopefully, this part is a little bit harder, you're going to have to help me, is to really try to build certain themes in the Megillah. And hopefully at the end we could find, let's say 5-10 main themes. Okay, so with that being said, this is not a trick. I'm going to read the first pasuk, but not because we're doing it inside. We're doing background today. But just to give you an understanding, the Megillah starts off, next week we'll have it in front of us, Vayihi bimei shvot hashoftim. So it was in the days, Vayihi bimei, of the judgment of the judges, Vayihi rav ba'aretz, and there was a famine in the land. We'll stop there, halfway through the pasuk. So you're writing a book, you're writing a Megillah, so you should tell us when this is taking place. It doesn't tell us anything. It was in the time that the judges judged. So the judges judged, started at the end of Yeshua, and lasted about 400 years. So that leaves us baffled. Now, I'm not claiming to be an academic scholar or a scholar in any sense on the whole Tanakh and the whole Rus. I understand that there are different opinions, and you might have heard different opinions than I will be presenting. I'm trying to stick with the position that the Gemara is taking. There's an entire Medrash Rabbah called Rus Rabbah, which probably has different opinions about things. It's a beautiful work. The entire beginning of it is just quoting different psukim as an introduction to Rus. It's really beautiful. The copy of the Kol is not available because I'm borrowing it until we finish. No, but so we're going to try to stick with the themes that are presented in the Gemara, and for simplicity's sake and for clarity's sake. So when did this happen? 400 years of Shoftim. And this happened in the time of Shoftim. So when did this happen? So the Gemara picks up on this, and it says, first of all, what is the idea of Shvot HaShoftim? The Gemara Bava Basra says that it's a dor sheshofet hashoftav. It's a generation that judged its judges. Omer lo, if a judge would say, Tol kisim mebein einecha, take out a splinter from your eyes, which means to say, rid yourself of some minor infraction, the defendant would say back to him, Omer lo, tol korah mebein einecha, take out a beam from your eyes. So meaning you have a judge, leader of the Jewish people, after Yeshua, a whole list of judges. And what happened was, they would be trying to judge, and they would get a nice response back. He would tell you a minor infraction, and you would tell him, as we say in Hebrew, Yiddish, and English, chutzpah, right? And you would talk right back to him. So this was a time which wasn't so pleasant. Now, the end, Shoftim, Yoshua was the first one, right? Yoshua was a Navi after Moshe, then started the generation of Shoftim. If you look in, hopefully we'll have it next time in front of us, but Shoftim Perek Beis, Psukim Yud and Yud Aleph, talk about after Yoshua died, so then there was a generation that came that didn't know Hashem, and instead they did Ra, they did evil in the eyes of Hashem, V'yavdu es haba'alim, and they went and worshipped the idol worship called Baal. So after Yoshua, they started to be a decline in the way the judges judged. They started doing evil. It was a generation that didn't know Hashem, and they started doing evil in the eyes of Hashem. Now, just interesting to note that, if we can find it here, the very end of Shoftim, as it ends off, it says, "B'yamim hahem ein melech b'Yisrael, ish hayasher be'einav yasa." So, in those days, the very end of the Shoftim, there was no king. It makes a point of telling us the end of Shoftim ended off with no king. Hopefully, I'm very much hoping and davening that one of the things we could appreciate after the Sefer, myself for sure included, is the idea of kingship. It's you look in a society nowadays which, whether you're in Israel or whether you're in America, the breakdown of society and the lack of leadership is unbelievable. And this is something which I was just telling my wife on Yom HaShoah. So we were talking about it when I was visiting Auschwitz. I think it was there. There's a sign up. If you don't learn about history, you'll let it repeat itself again. Right? So this happened right after Yeshua died. We'll see hopefully what happened. Chazal pick up on what happened. Moshe left the Bezdin with Yeshua. There was Pinchas on the Bezdin. Yeshua died. Next thing we know, they did evil in the eyes of Hashem. Sefer Shoftim ends with Bayam Mahem Ein Melech B'Yisrael, which means to say that there is no competent, there is no ruler leading the people. Ish hayashar be'einav yasa. Each person didn't do whatever they wanted lawlessly. Ish hayashar. Yashar, he was yashar. Yashar means straight, righteous, upright. He did what he thought was right in his own eyes. So you mean, picture the scene. You have a lot of people who are very competent, people who have lived through a lot. They've seen things over the times of the Shoftim that they liked and many things that they didn't like. And what happens now? Sefer Shoftim concludes that there is no king. And the second half of the verse is, each person hayashar be'einav yasa. Each person did what was right in their own eyes. So there's really maybe more, but there are at least two ways you can imagine a lawless society. Everyone just runs around and riots and decides to just make fires and things like that. But that doesn't seem to be what it says. It's ish hayashar be'einav yasa, meaning you're dealing with people who they think they're right. They think they're very right. And not only that, they act on what they think is right. You can think about nowadays, that happens all the time. No one, in their world, they're right. But you're not regarding everyone else's world. And you're not regarding my world. When you're dealing with somebody and you get into an argument, so it's almost foolish, it's silly to say who's right, I'm right, or you're right. If you had their assumptions, you might come to the same conclusions. But instead, you have different assumptions. So therefore, you come to different conclusions. So who's right or wrong? You have to go to a third person who's objective about it. But between two people, with his assumptions, of course he's right. And with your assumptions, of course you're right. So now imagine that in a greater society. You have a Jewish people who, has a mitzvah in the Torah to get yourself a king, a special mitzvah of kingship, and they're left without a king. And they've been 400 years. As soon as Yeshua died, it's been a downhill spiral. And now we get to Rus. Now, why am I saying that Rus comes after Shoftim? So the Gemara says that Shmuel Hanavi wrote 3 Svarim. He wrote 3 books. One of them is Sefer Shmuel, right? So the book of Samuel. The other one is Sefer Shoftim. And the third one is Megillas Rus. Megillas Rus. Now, I forgot to give an introduction of where I'm getting my information from. It's also important. There's 2 primary sources, along with, the basic Megillah with Rashi. But there's a beautiful book I was told to get called Rising Moon, or of Moshe Miller, who wrote 350 pages of ultimate beauty in the Megillas Rus. I haven't got through all of it yet, but and then Rav Aaron Lipyansky, based on a Hebrew Sefer, wrote a book called Seed of Redemption, which when I first read it, I know him a little bit, so also beautiful themes to take with us. So Rav Moshe Miller, in his Rising Moon, he points out Shoftim ends off, Ein Melech B'Yisrael, there is no king. So then, Sefer Shmuel starts off with, Shmuel, go appoint a king. So now, how do we get from Sefer Shoftim to kingship? Ein Melech B'Yisrael, now Shmuel's job is to get a Yesh Melech B'Yisrael. Go find a king. What's the transition? What's the bridge? So he wants to suggest that's Rus. Rus is the transition, 4 chapters of, if you understand Rus, and you go through Rus, and every word there, we try to understand it. Some will be more detail-oriented, and some will bring out bigger themes. But Rus, and hopefully we'll see through a few Midrashim and Gemaras, is really, as the book is called here, the seed of redemption. It's a seed. If you ever planted stuff, I can't say I have since, maybe 3rd grade, but I'm trying to plant myself and water myself. But if you try to think of a seed, so it doesn't just sprout all of a sudden. People often say, you know why you read Rus? Because Rus is the great-grandmother of David HaMelech. And the Megillah ends off talking about that. But hopefully we'll bring out, it's not just that she was a great-great-great-grandmother of, no, she was the seed from her sprouted Malchus, sprouted kingship. Kingship, to have what Hashem wants as a king of our nation, it takes work. It takes a lot of work. And it takes a lot of things to have to fit in beautifully. The Gemara says that the head, our head is called the Melech al Kol Eivarim. Our head is the king, also a king on our whole body. How does the body work? So I don't claim to know 100% or 90%, but how does the body work? A lot of things work together, right? And in the brain, there are over 100 billion neurons. And all of those are perfectly, they synthesize perfectly, hopefully. And through that comes this greater thing called your brain with all your thoughts and everything. But it's the greater picture. It's the greater idea. It's the much bigger picture of all the small parts. So Malchus, in a similar way, is not a bunch of people saying, I want a king, I want a king. It has to emerge. It has to sprout. It has to come together. That only comes through the Jewish people being on a certain level where hopefully through that will sprout Malchus. So he wants to suggest that Rus is the bridge. Rus is the middle sefer. Yes?
Can you explain that one more time?
Yeah. Actually, there's 2 pages I bookmarked to read it from his language, but Malchus is supposed to emerge. An emergence is something, a melech is something which is much greater than the sum of the parts. You can have a lot of different parts, and then you have something which is much bigger. Let's say one has a family. Let's say one has a congregation, just as a parable, right? So when you think about it, let's say, let's talk about maybe, let's choose a Hasidus, I don't know, Belzer Hasidim, Ger Hasidim, right? Just so when someone thinks about that, someone who knows them, it's much bigger than the fact that there are every Shabbos 50,000 Jews coming together that all look the same, right? What comprises a Hasidus? What comprises a congregation? What comprises a family? What comprises more neshama, right? Well, I was born here, I live this long, and I have a few ideas, and therefore there's so many parts that at the end of the day, what you're seeing is a much bigger picture, which is called you. So, which is called me, which is called us, which is called the greater Jewish people. So a melech, maybe I'll read. He says, a malchus cannot be requested or produced mechanically. It must emerge. And he says, malchus will never result from a structure that is defined and delimited. Anarchy, rather, is the ideal breeding ground for malchus because it encourages the individualism out of which societal complexity can emerge. So all the interpersonal relationships between the individuals in that system, all together, through that will emerge. We'll see more, hopefully, this concept as we go through, but that's Rus. He writes, it must be a natural outgrowth of a development that has reached a stage that demands integration. It must grow out of a vast complex of interrelationships that insists upon it. So he's explaining here that the Jews asked for a king, and Hashem wasn't happy with them. And he's saying, what do you mean? There's a mitzvah to have a king. So it's a famous question. There's a mitzvah to have a king. They asked for a king in the time of Shmuel, and Hashem got upset at them. And so he's coming to explain, you don't ask for a king. A king emerges. You appoint a king. You don't ask for a king. Not everyone, I want. It has to emerge. We have to come together, and the king will emerge out of that. Many leaders emerge. How do they emerge? How does a leader become a leader? So politically, you make good political moves, and you get a lot of money, and you decide to argue. And if you're good enough and famous enough, right, so that's in one world. But in other words, how does a gadol, think of how does Rechaim Kanievsky, how did he become Rechaim Kanievsky? How did, the leaders that came to America after Europe, that came here, how they emerge as leaders? It wasn't because they did a few. It was the sum of everything. Everything added up to a leader. It was much bigger. You can't define it. A person really is also like that. You can't define a person. You can't define a Shem, but a person you also can't define. We're much bigger than just the few parts that make us up, or the many parts that make us up. So, so Rus is that transition. So, yeah.
If they're saying that anarchy is the breeding ground for this, the way a leader emerges out of anarchy is they have a bigger stick and they beat everybody else down. So how do we decouple this from violence?
Right. So we're hoping that Malchus and David Melech would use a different approach. Right? I mean, he's not going to beat anybody, but when you have a society that's coming together, that hopefully we'll see more. I'm just presenting a theme. We'll see more as it develops.
He did end up beating a lot of people, though.
Okay.
That's why he didn't build the temple.
He had to fight a lot of wars. The Gemara says he had blood on his hands, but yeah, David was Kodesh HaKadoshim. He was the holy. David was, Okay, so let's see. So how did this all happen? So once again, the beginning of Shoftim, the Gemara told us, was a time they judged their judges. Yoshua died. We started going off in a very bad trajectory. Shoftim ends off, no king in Israel. Everyone did a Yashir Be'einav. Rus is the transition, the bridge between Shoftim and Shmuel, which is going to be Malchus.
Does
So
Yoshua get criticized for not appointing a king?
that's a good question.
You know what I mean? Like, was he, because there is this conflict about it, but was that considered a failure of Yoshua's, that he didn't appoint a king and that he left?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know the answer. Yeah. So let's see. So just a few.
But just like Hashem said, when we asked for a king at the time of Shaul, he said, you don't ask for a king, I'll tell you when you're a king.
He happens to point to him, and he goes through so much here. We can't do it all but he points that even the word Shaul is borrowed. The word means borrowed. I mean, that was even a result. It was borrowed time.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't supposed to be.
You weren't ready yet.
Even Shmuel, the Gemara says Shmuel and Shaul actually overlapped for a year. And he talks about how Shmuel's family, he came from a family of kingship, of leadership. He was a perfect person to write the Sefer Rus. So I can only cover so much, but Rising Moon is a good. Okay, so there's a few midrashim. I'm sorry they're not in front of you, but so the Gemara says that the Medrash says in Rus and in the Medrash in Rus and Tana de Belio, and it talks about the verse in Yehoshua 24:30, Chav Daled Lamed. It says, "Vayikbru oso b'gvul nachalaso mitzafon lahar Gaash." Gimel Ayin Shin. They buried Yehoshua in a place called Gaash. Says the Medrash, we look through the whole Tanakh for a place called Gaash, and we don't know what it is. Rather, it's a place, Aideshin is Agshu, which Ron Lapiansky translated as preoccupied. Yisrael me'asos gemilas chesed Yoshua. Fascinating. The Jews did not do chesed with Yoshua after he died. No mention of a eulogy, no mention of he died, and that was it. Why? It said ba'oso shah. I'm a little bit unclear if it means when they first entered Eretz Yisrael or it means right after Yoshua died. You'll see why I have that doubt in a second. Ba'oso shah. Nachla Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael was being split up. Everyone was going. Let's read English. At that time, the land of Israel was being divided among the tribes, and its division, the land, was too beloved to them. Meaning, we love Eretz Yisrael, and instead it was too chaviv. It was too beloved. Well, that's how. Next week, hopefully, we'll get the source sheet so you can appreciate the language. It was too beloved to them, which is fascinating. We have a mitzvah, Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, to go to Eretz Yisrael, to live in Eretz Yisrael. It's Hashem's most beloved land. So, Israel were engaged in their labor. This one was occupied in his field. This one was occupied in his vineyard, and this one was occupied in his olives, and this one was occupied with his planks. It says Israel was negligent in doing kindness for Yeshua. And then Hashem was going to bring an earthquake upon the world, as the word, the same shorish comes up by earthquake. Next, so that's just one. We started failing. We didn't treat our leaders. You see, there was a leader here, Yoshua. Yoshua was unbelievable. Yoshua was Moshe's star Talmud. Yoshua, by Kabbalah Torah, when we got the Torah, was the only one allowed to be waiting down there. I remember hearing one time, why is it so important that he was waiting there and all the Jews were over there? Because part of the Torah is, it's given to be given over. You don't keep it for yourself. You give it to give it over to people, to give it over to the whole Jewish people. Yoshua is the one Moshe was not able to go into Eretz Yisrael, into Israel. Yeshua was. I mean, he was everything. He was everything to Moshe. So, and yet, he passed away, and the Medrash points out, everyone was too busy in their own, once again, not for a lawless, they weren't just running around, because Eretz Yisrael was too chaviv, meaning it was chaviv, fantastic. Too chaviv, sometimes we get too involved in certain mitzvahs, sometimes, I laugh at myself. I had a Rebbe used to, who I found, one who married myself and my wife off, Rav Cohen, a very chashuv person. He would ask me, a very important person, to get something for him. So I remember the alacrity I would go, at the expense of other people in my way, right? It's like a classic, because I was so focused on one thing, everything else. So you could be so focused on something, on Mitzvah Yisrael. You have a chance now, go take your piece of land. This is your land, this is your heritage. You're going to pass on to your generations of thousands and thousands of years of Jews. And yet they were too engrossed in that they didn't give the proper respect to Yeshua. So you see a few things here. First of all, you see that things don't always start downhill because of bad things. Doing Averis. Shoftim, of 400 years of Shoftim, which was a very hard time, didn't start necessarily because everyone just doing Averis. Yes, not burying somebody, not eulogizing him is not the right thing to do. But it says here they didn't do the chesed to Yeshua. They were too busy in their own mitzvahs, in their own mitzvah observance. So that's one thing. Two is, you have a leader. What happened over here? He was your leader. You have a leader. You have to respect the leader when he's alive and when he dies. There's special halachas about when a leader passes away and he's someone who's such a big person, you have to leave everything you're doing and go and pay the right respect to him. That's the right thing to do in that moment. Why am I bringing this out? Because we'll see hopefully next week, Sefer Ruth starts off with a leader who had a chance to be a source of courage for his people, and he abandoned them, and he left, and he ran away to from Beis Lechem to go to Stay Moav, which we'll talk about more. It's like a direct contrast. Beis Lechem was an incredibly spiritual place. Stay Moav was not. So that's how it starts off. So we're trying to understand what the bridge is between Shoftim and Malchus. And the background is that it started with that there was a certain lack of attitude, respect, kindness towards your leader. How important the leaders of the Jewish people are. They're what we have. They're the light in the tunnel. They're the ones that we have to go to when things are dark. They know what Hashem wants better than we do. Nowadays we don't have prophets. How much more so, not any prophet, it's Yeshua. It's the one right after Moshe Rabbeinu. And how fast we could forget. And how fast we have to be on our toes. That just because you have clarity one moment, you have to remember that the next moment it might not come. And when it doesn't come, to get back on your feet and go search out clarity. Because it's so easy to fall, even when you have Yeshua, such a bright light in your life. He could be gone and something else exciting comes up, Eretz Yisrael, and you're running, and then you get criticized for it. The second medrash is from Tana de Belio, and it's talking about why there were so many people that died at the last story that was mentioned in Shoftim. We don't have time to go through it. Called the Pilegish Begiva. There's the concubine of Giva. Look at the end of Shoftim for the story. But it says there that how they all die, it says, Lefi shehaya lahem l'sanhedrin gedola. They had an incredible Sanhedrin, the body that rules the Jewish people. Shehiniach Moshe v'Yeshua, uPinchas ben Elazar was on the Sanhedrin. What should they have done? This just brings another perspective of what a leader should do. Those leaders, hayah lahem leilich, they should have walked, tied up chains, and went. It sounds like they should have girded their loins, traveled across Israel. And I'll read do they have the English here? Where's the English? No, okay. Read the Hebrew. So they're supposed to go around Israel, to go to each city, to Hebron, to Yerushalayim, b'chol makomos, and teach people the Yilamdu es Yisrael derech eretz. 1 year, for 2 years, for 3 years, until all the Jewish people settled in their land. It was a job of the leaders to go around and to make sure we're not just physically settled. That's beautiful. We need to be spiritually settled. And now it's a new land. We didn't have to work for the land before. We were in the desert. Now we're in Eretz Yisrael. You have to work for your land. How do you balance working and spiritually growing? One of the greatest questions everyone faces. How to balance, I'm working 9 to 5 in a job and I'm supposed to be somehow spiritual. How does that all work? So the Medrash says, where were the leaders? They should have gone, and they didn't. And what would have happened if they would have gone and taught the Jewish people the way they were supposed to? The Medrash says, if they would have went around to Hebron, Yerushalayim, Bechol Makomos, what would have happened? Not just people would know what to do now in a spiritual sense and how to act in a new land. But what would happen? Yizgadol v'yiskadesh shemo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like the Kaddish, Yizgadol v'yiskadesh. God's name would have been made great in the world. Sounds like all the worlds, all the spiritual worlds. V'heim lo asukein. Ella kishenichnesu la'artzam, when they went into the land, kol echad ve'echad. I think it points out each one, meaning each one on their own. They only worried about themselves. It wasn't a combined Jewish people. That's all. It was kol echad ve'echad me'am nichnas lekarma, to his vineyard, and u'esaideyu. And what they say, a pasuk which is reminiscent of the end of Devarim, they said, Shalom alecha nafshi, peace be upon to my soul. Meaning, I'm good. Shalom alecha nafshi, I'm good to go. Kol echad ve'echad, as long as I get my vineyard and I produce my money, and I'm good. And you're focused, very, very focused. Other Medrash says it was too chaviv. It wasn't like they didn't understand that Eretz Yisrael is a very beautiful spiritual place. But they went, Kol echad ve'echad nichnas lekarmo, Shalom alecha nafshi. Yeah, peace be unto me. So, and then it ends off, Kach shanu chachamim. This is what the sages said in Pirkei Avos. We're learning that Pirkei Avos, the time of Sfiras Omer. Have mema'et be'esek. One should lessen their involvement in the physical world. Va'asuk b'Torah, which I want to understand means not only specifically engaging, but be more involved in spiritual pursuits. Meaning, no one says you shouldn't be involved in physical pursuits. Of course, we should be very involved in physical pursuits. But there has to be a point where you say, I don't need the $100 million. I don't need it. There has to be. It can't. If not, what's going to happen is you can give a mitzvah Eretz Yisrael and you can go in and just worry only about yourself. So that's the other medrash that shows a little bit the breakdown of how this whole shoftim, what happened over here? How did they break down? On the one hand, Yoshua wasn't buried properly. They were so involved in their own mitzvah Eretz Yisrael, it was too chaviv for them. And then you have this medrash pointing out, they all ran in, peace be unto me, let's go. And these are great people. They weren't like, but you just see that no matter as great as you are on their level, when you have opportunities, Eretz Yisrael, a tremendous opportunity, it can somehow blind a person. And the medrash tells you, make sure, mema'ed be'esek va'asuk b'Torah. Try, meaning always, be cognizant. Am I working too much? How am I balancing my physicality and my spirituality? The same way in health, that you have to always balance, right? You have to balance how much you have of this nutrient, that nutrient. So too spiritually. You're going to put too much emphasis in the physicality, and the spirituality sometimes can suffer and can lead a person down a very scary path. One last thing, and this will end. So I told you I was going to end early. Not just for you, but mainly for you. So the one more Gemara. The Gemara, as a machlokes who Eov was, not so necessarily relevant to us right now. So one opinion held that Eov was very early on in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Gemara Bava Basra 14b. So wants to know what's the order of Tanakh. Order is something which is very important. It's not just a random question. The order of everything is extremely precise. So it says Eov b'mei Moshe haya. Eov, one opinion says he was in the time of Moshe, so you should put Eov first. Put Eov right away after Devarim, maybe after Yoshua. Eov should come in the beginning, or maybe after the Nevi'im Rishonim, maybe in the beginning of the Ksuvim. So he said, no, we don't start off with Puranisa. We don't start off with punishment or suffering is the word they use. You don't start off that set of Tanakh with suffering. So says the Gemara, but Rus, Rus does come. Rus is in the Ksuvim. Rus is first. So Rus nami Puranisi. Says, what do you mean? Look how it starts off. He died. Two sons died. I mean, it's a lot of, says the Gemara, is a big difference, and this is going to hopefully be the bridge to next week. Rus nami Puranisi. You're right. Rus and Eov, very similar. They both have a lot of sadness, a lot of hardships, a lot of suffering. What's the difference? Peronius, Rus, is the Isle Achris. Rus is a suffering, literally, that has an ending. The Amr Rabbi Yochanan, why is she called Rus? They point out, not why is she called Rus, because that's her name. Why is the book referred to as the book of Rus? Right, so we'll say, because, she's the main character. So the Gemara says differently. Sheyatza mimenu David. Why is she called Rus? Because David came from her. Okay. So she had a famous grandson? No. Sheriva'u la'akadosh baruch hu b'shirot tzishbachos. David, Riva here means he satiated. He, so to speak, satiated the Holy One, Hashem, with songs and praises. As we have the next Sefer Tehillim. So what's the difference? What does this mean in the big picture? And, okay, we still have a few minutes, don't worry. So what does this mean in the big picture? Rus and Eov, they both have suffering. Suffering, it's a fact of life. Fortunately, unfortunately, depends how a person reacts, I guess. For some people, it's very fortunate. They grow a lot through suffering. For some people, it tears them apart. Nations, generations. However, Rus, one of the main points of Rus, the main themes, as we'll see, it's suffering, but it has an ending to it. The ending is David Melech. And we'll see next time that the whole Rus, the Medrash says, where did I find David Melech? I found him in, anybody know? Not, Michael, not in Portland. Not in Southwest, no. I found David. Not that I'm comparing the two, but I found David with Lot. Where did I find David? I found him in Sdom. In Sdom. Why? Because Lot left Sdom, and he had 2 daughters. And the Medrash says there was 2 nimtzaos, 2 findings that came out of that story. Who were these 2 findings? These like a mitzvah, something you find. Rus and Orpah were the 2, meaning that the whole story of David and Melech started in Sdom. And we have to understand more exactly what was Sdom and why did Sdom merit to produce David Melech. But it's Sdom, as we'll see, is in direct contrast to Rus. Sdom was antithetical to Chesed. Rus was so much Chesed. And we know the world is built on Chesed. It survives off Chesed. That we'll see more. But Rus is a message for us, which we'll hopefully see more, is that suffering might happen and it's not going to be pleasant in the moment. But I think what Chazal, what the rabbis are teaching us is that it ends off, it produced kingship. For some reason, and this is food for thought, Malchus, so far, one theme that we see, it comes from a place of things that we would never expect. From Sdom, produced Malchus. From suffering, produced not only Malchus, a person who satiated Hashem with beautiful shiros, songs of praise. So you see, where does Malchus come from? It does not come from because my father was always the Melech, maybe sometimes, but originally it came from roots that were very humble. And it came from Sdom was a total breakdown of society. Shali v'shalach shali, it says in Pirkei Avos. Mine and yours is mine. Total taking. Rus is total giving. And from that, Rus is somebody from those roots, but she had a tremendous courage, and she was, as the name of this is called, a seed of redemption. And so just to summarize, in 1 minute remaining, is that we tried to point out the beginning is Rus, Shmuel wrote Rus. Shmuel wrote Rus, and he wrote Shoftim, and he wrote his Sefer Shmuel. Shoftim is judges, not a good time. Breakdown in society, the people were judging their judges. 400 years of breakdown, which started with a lack of respect to Yeshua, started with too much involvement in your own pursuits, and that ended up producing kingship, which is Shmuel. But in the middle is Rus. Love and hate, love, all these interpersonal relationships, it all is building towards what Malchus really is. So, Bez Hashem, God willing, we'll have beautiful sort sheets. I'll have 7 days to work hard on them, and not 1 day. And we'll see them more inside, and hopefully we'll begin at least the first 5 to 8 psukim in the first parak to get a real, try to understand the words, go through the words well, and understand some of the themes. And then hopefully we'll finish off the first parak the week after, and I haven't planned past that. Have a great night.